Welcome to the Orca. Proportional representation was soundly defeated last month, but a court challenge of the entire process, a process which the Globe and Mail called, and I quote here, Canada's least honest attempt at electoral reform, unquote. Well, another court case is still on schedule to be heard at the BC Supreme Court. And yet another court challenge against the BC government, this one opposing the order that all workers of the Pattullo Bridge must join a government-approved union, is also underway. And the common denominator in all of this is the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association, of which is leading both challenges. Chris Gardner is the president of the ICBA and joins us here in the Orca studios. Hello there.
Hello, Rick. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
It's great to be back.
61-39, pretty resounding victory for the no side. So why the court case?
Well, you know, it was an early Christmas present. I was traveling, and it was great news to get when I was out of the country. But listen, it was the same result. Funny enough, that the referendum that was held in 2009 held, and it was nearly identical result. And I think the message is very clear. British Columbians have considered electoral reform in terms of
3 times.
Yes, 2005, 2009, and most recently. And I think when it's put in this, there's lots of ways to reform our electoral system and our democracy. But when British Columbians have considered the existing system versus proportional representation, they've been very clear that they do not support proportional representation. And I think what happened in this process is that, and you quoted the Globe and Mail editorial, the government rushed the process. There was no meaningful consultation. The question was very confusing. They did not have a clear question that said the existing system versus, this other alternative. They had 3 different alternatives, 2 of which were not in use anywhere in the world, and no one could. It was difficult for many voters to understand the implications of any one of them, and they lowered the threshold from 60% to 50% plus 1. And when you're making a fundamental change to our democracy, none of this makes sense. It really was a system that the government, the NDP government, and the Attorney General said he was a neutral arbiter. He was anything but neutral. They'd invested a lot in getting to yes. They rigged the system and the process to get to that result. It was unfair, and voters saw through that by a margin of 61-39. So, question, what do we do with our court case?
Well, but given all of that, yeah, you won. So why the court case?
So the history of the court case is that in June, the government posts the regulations. Here's how the referendum is going to, here are the rules for the referendum, and here's the date of the mail-in ballot. And immediately, within about 10 days, we were in court saying, okay, hold on. This process doesn't make sense for all the reasons I just articulated. And the government came to court 2 weeks later, and we said, listen, we were in front of the judge, and we said, we need to hear these issues quickly. The referendum is in a few months, is a few months from now, and these are important issues. And the government said, well, we're not ready, we need more time. And our response was, well, you've published the rules for the referendum, you've come up with the question, and now you're saying you're not ready to defend your process and the question and all of the rules around the referendum in court. And so, the judge said, okay, well, if they need more time, they need more time. And we said, well, what about August? And they said, we won't be ready, we need more time. What about September? The same answer. October, November, December, they were still saying we wouldn't be ready. They said, well, we'll be ready in January of 2019, January the 21st. So that is the court date that has been set down. So the question for us now is this. It's our view that for the 5 months of the referendum campaign, the government was violating significant constitutional rights of British Columbians. So now the government will say, well, the results are in, so none of this matters. Our view is, well, not so fast. It does matter. The government can't say, well, we violated your constitutional rights for 5 months. Now we've stopped doing that, so then everything is okay. Because they could turn around and do the same thing next year or the year after.
So this is really now a preemptive strike of anything that follows similar to the referendum.
Yeah, I think there are important issues that a court should rule on. They should decide, and the message should be sent to the government that they can't tread so carelessly over important rights of British Columbians. They can't limit free speech, which is what they did. For 5 months, no one was allowed to spend any money making their position known, whether they were for or against proportional representation, without following a very onerous set of rules and procedures. But how we will, what decision we will make on the 21st or before the 21st, whether or not to continue it, is still an open question. We're consulting with our legal counsel, but the issues are alive. They're real. We just have not made the final decision about whether we'll go ahead or not.
Okay, so that's one court case.
Yep.
Here's another court case. This strikes at the very heart of what the ICBA is all about, independent contractors. And this government, the NDP government, has said that only government-approved union workers can be hired to work in the Pattullo Bridge.
Right.
In fact, that sets a pattern for all future infrastructure projects in this province.
Yep.
And you're going to court over that again.
Yeah, we expect to be in court in February, and if you step back and here's what the government's doing. What the government has said is that if you want to participate and work on the $1.3 billion replacement of the Pattullo Bridge, you have to be a member of not any union, but of one of 19 building trades unions. And to put that in perspective, the building trades unions represent about 15% of the nearly 250,000 men and women who work in construction every day in this province. The other 85% of workers are frozen out of this project. That's not fair, it's discriminatory, it's not right, and we're challenging that in court.
It's also more expensive, is it not? Didn't we see this with the Island Highway project a number of years ago, where the government of the day insisted on only unionized labor to build that project? Yep. It finished way over time and way over budget.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point, because we're in an environment now where the construction sector is very busy, and so the biggest challenge facing construction companies is finding labor to work on these projects. So why in this environment would the government say we're going to restrict the number of workers who can participate on these projects when we're in an environment where there's a labor shortage? So that doesn't make any sense. The second issue is that because the construction sector has been so busy, there have been wage increases that have been very significant for the last 4 years of roughly an average of 5% a year every single year. So when the government says, well, we're doing this because we think that construction workers should be paid more, well, the reality is construction workers are being paid a premium. Then the government said, well, we're doing this to train more people. Well, the construction sector is training more people, more women, more Indigenous, more people from Indigenous communities, more young people than they ever have before. If you want a job in construction today, you can be working on a job site on Monday morning because the need is so significant.
Have you approached the government on this, and if so, what was the response?
I think every single stakeholder in the business community, in the construction sector, plus construction contractors, have had multiple meetings with the government to say, hang on, this doesn't make any sense. You aren't going to train any more people. You're not going to attract any more people to construction by limiting the number of people who can work on a provincially funded project.
You may in fact jeopardize the project if you can't get the workers.
And you aren't going to end up paying people more. What you are going to do is you're adding a layer of bureaucracy, because what the government will say is, oh no, any worker can work on this project. What they're leaving out is that worker, you could be a construction worker who's worked for a company for 20 years, and then that company decides, if they decide, okay, we're going to bid for some work on the Pattullo Bridge project, what that company is going to discover is that when a construction company bids a project, they have their workforce of 100 or 200 or 50 employees. They know the experience, the skills, the productivity, the safety culture within the company. They can use that information to put in a competitive bid. But under this new framework, what will happen is, if a company is selected and their employees are not part of the building trades unions, they're either non-unionized or part of a different union, those workers will have to join a building trades union. And that company may end up with a good portion of its workforce working on that project who they've never met or seen before, because they will come from a union hiring hall, and they may not be their workers. And so, you know, how does a company bid work without understanding who its labor force is going to be? And if you're a worker, what about your health benefits? What about your retirement plans? What about your bonus and profit sharing plans that you may have with your existing employer? All of that will go away. You'll have to sign you'll have a new benefits provider. You'll have a new pension plan provider. There will be no bonuses under a union hiring plan. There will be no profit sharing under a union hiring plan. So workers are going to be impacted in a very negative way.
Final question, and when you look at the whole scope of what's going on in this province, as you mentioned here in the Lower Mainland, we're still on a track of unprecedented growth in construction. But so too is the interior, so too is the north. New projects are being added, Site C, LNG. Where does the workforce come from?
Well, we are in British Columbia and in Canada going over a demographic cliff. And there are significant pressures in the labor force across all sectors of the economy.
And we've got retirement of skilled laborers with not enough young laborers in the workforce to replace them.
That's right. And if you look, it's the same in the hotel sector, it's the same in the restaurant sector, it's the same in the retail sector. And unless we grapple with this, it's not just about training people, it's the fact there's not enough people. And so we are going to have to look at things like immigration and working smarter and being more creative with how we, and being more flexible with how we deal with workplace
So having
issues.
said all that,
Yeah.
back to my initial question, and that is the government then not throwing, for lack of a better term, a spanner in the works by adding this new restriction that only laborers who work on public sector infrastructure projects must be unionized?
Yeah, the government's taken an approach that goes back to the 1970s. Structured workforce, rules-bound.
That was 50 years ago.
Yeah, and the problem is now we've got younger workers. What do younger workers want? They want more flexibility. They want more choice. And the economy does respond better when there is more choice. The government will get better and higher quality bids from the private sector by letting the private sector come to government and say, you want to replace the Pattullo Bridge, here's how we think you should do it, and here's why. But by being prescriptive and saying, well, you can only do this project if you hire workers from 19 unions that represent 15% of the workforce, and you have to ignore the other 85% of the construction workforce, that makes no sense. Costs will increase, there'll be more bureaucracy, workers are going to lose, and taxpayers are going to lose.
Chris Gardner, always a pleasure.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.